to A Conversation with Lawrence Gowan. I'm your host, Eric Miller. This is part of the Pods and Sods Network, and I want to thank you, first off, as always, for clicking the download button or the subscribe button or whatever series of buttons you click in order to find this episode. It's always super appreciated, so thanks for that. I'm a Styx fan. I'm a Styx fan of all eras. Obviously grew up on them in the 70s, and I love the current lineup. I love the early 2000s lineup. When Lawrence came in '99, I love Dennis solo. I love Tommy solo. I love JY solo. I love Lawrence Gowan stuff before Styx, Glenn Burnick stuff. I love it all. So I have no sort of judgment, or I don't take sides on any of this. I think it's one awesome continuum. So it was a real thrill to chat with Lawrence. We talked about his discovery of music, recording some of his earlier solo albums as Gowan, and in fact one, I guess maybe his most successful one, Strange Animal, he recorded at Ringo's house. And we talk about meeting Ringo. Ringo would kind of come in and out during the recording, which is pretty awesome. We talk about kind of what his career was like in Canada, challenges of him trying to break in to the markets in the U.S., touring with Tears for Fears, and what grunge meant to him, and then connecting with Styx. We go through his entire career with Styx, Cyclorama, extensive touring, and kind of what's next. So, we cover it all. It's a good thorough interview, and Lawrence is Larry is a real sweetheart, just a genuine nice guy. So hopefully you will enjoy this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. So without any further ado, Lawrence Gowan. Gives me great pleasure to welcome the one and only Lawrence Gowan. Welcome, Lawrence.
How are you, Eric?
Doing well, man. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me. You have a long and illustrious career, and I want to focus on a lot of it, and kind of what's next for Styx and what's next for you personally. But going back to the early days, going to the beginning. How did you essentially come to the piano as a little kid, I assume?
Yeah, as a little kid, as a little kid when I was like 8 years old, I bugged my dad for a lot for a guitar, and I got one eventually, and played that for a couple of years. And it was, my parents could see that I had a pretty avid, interest in music. But my mom, it's funny, she just kind of, I was playing something on guitar, and she said, "Have you ever thought of trying another instrument?" I don't know if that was like her judging my guitar playing is not so hot.
Right.
I said, "Well, what would that be?" And she said, "Well, of course, the piano would be a lovely instrument to play." We're Scottish background. Right. And I said, "Well, we don't have a piano, And she said, "Well, if you took lessons, maybe you'll get one." So how I ended up on piano, actually, it's interesting when you look at it in the light of today, in that because we didn't have a piano, I wasn't unique in that way back then in the 60s. A lot of people, kids would take piano lessons but didn't have a piano, and instead we had this piece of Bristol board cardboard that you would fold out, and it had all the keys, correct size,
Right.
kind of stenciled onto the cardboard, and you'd read the music. You're learning to read music, and memorize, basically tapping the right notes as you unfold the cardboard onto a table, and you've got the keys laid out there. So without any sound at all, it'd be like a once a week thing where I'd go to my class and actually hear what it was that I've been practicing all week.
Wow.
Or drumming on the table. But it's funny. I think a little bit of an extra layer of challenge like that can either turn a kid off or make them even that much more intrigued. And so for me, it was the latter, and that that started me down the piano path. Although I was always convinced that I could, that I could make it as a guitar player somehow.
Right.
And in high school, I had one band that I played guitar in, and the other band that I played piano in. And the one that I played piano in just got booked more and kind of went over better.
Right.
Mainly because there were so many better guitar players around than myself that I finally thought, well, why not? And if you look at my whole career, it's kind of been like that, where these great guitar players I've been in the proximity of. And but man, I can tell you that the level of teachers I've had for that instrument has really escalated over the years.
Yeah. You you were classically trained at a point. You went to conservatory, right? So
Yeah.
I'm curious about your early influences. Were they more did you grow up? I think you're sort of a prog geek, if you will. Did you grow up listening to Rick Wakeman and all that kind of stuff?
Yes. Yeah, I did. I mean, the little transition to piano that I did in the 60s, in late 60s when I was still in grade school, it was basically because the piano, like Beatles songs, the piano parts aren't, other than Lady Madonna,
Mm-hmm.
they're not terribly. Or actually, now that I think of it, Martha My Dear is pretty tough too. But anyway, they're not. They're a little bit. They're not incredibly difficult to handle as far as the technique goes. But then when I started hearing Elton John and listening a little closer to like Nicky Hopkins, who played with the Rolling Stones,
Mm-hmm.
and of course Billy Preston, as he began to add stuff to the Beatles catalog, I began to realize, God, these players are getting really good. And then actually, you're right, when I heard Rick Wakeman with Yes, that was the first time that I felt like, oh my God, his level of musicianship is so high. And then I noticed that, oh, look, Elton John and Rick Wakeman both went to the Royal Academy of Music. Well, in Toronto, I'm Canadian, we have the Royal Conservatory. So anytime it says Royal, that means, that's the Queen's stamp of approval.
Right.
So I decided to enroll in the Royal Conservatory, and at the end of high school, I decided to go there full time just to see if I could get my technique up to an acceptable level where I could actually play in a progressive rock band. And that was really the motivation behind it. But it's given me a lifelong affinity and a really deep love of classical music.
Yeah, no doubt, and it comes through in your work. I think one of your trademarks is a bit of versatility, right? So that's certainly part of it. Is in Styx, I've heard you do some ragtime. Your solo work, obviously picking up.
Yeah.
The classic Styx work. I want to ask a bit about Strange Animal, and specifically the fact that you recorded it at Starling Sound, and how did you end up there? And I assume you crossed paths with Ringo.
I did. Ringo was living there at the time. The name of the house, in England they name their houses. Anyway, the house is called Tittenhurst Park.
Right.
And any Beatle historians out there, and there's so many more of them now than there's ever been, would probably know that that's the house that John Lennon moved into when he and Yoko first got together.
Mm-hmm.
And for John, eventually he put in a home studio and he recorded Imagine, the whole Imagine album there.
Yeah.
But in early 70s, I think 72 or something like that, when John moved to America, I think that's when Ringo took over the house. And Ringo was living there from 70, somewhere in the early 70s, I believe. But he was there when I went there to record, which was in 1984. And in fact, I walked into that studio February the 7th, 1984, which is exactly 20 years to the day that the Beatles came to America. So I found that astounding, really. Just the coincidence of that. And Ringo was there and met us when we came in. Other people had recorded there, but you kind of had to know someone to get in there. And the person that I knew, and the person that suggested it, is the guy that produced the album, a guy named David Tickle.
Right.
Very talented producer. Had a lot of hit records in the 80s, particularly with Split Ends, and eventually an album with the vinyls, and I really liked Dave's production, and he had kind of helped Ringo look after that studio, because studios need a lot of maintenance, and so he'd done that, and he said, look, I've got this Canadian guy that I'm going to be producing a record with, and we'd like to record here. And Ringo was like, well, yeah, sure, bring him in. Wow. And that's really how it worked. It was really quite amazing, honestly. I find it astounding that it ever happened, and to be, in addition to that, there's another level to it as well. I was with three of the guys from, at that time, Peter Gabriel's band, Tony Levin, Jerry Marotta, and David Rhodes. And we had another guitar player who was from a British band named Chris Jarrett, who made tremendous contributions to the record. Anyway, we, the studio was like attached straight onto the kitchen. And if you ever see the movie Imagine, that came out, I think, around 87, you'll see, when John Lennon was recording Imagine there, you'll see basically it looks like the same gear was there when we were recording there. So he must have just left that gear there, and same mics and same everything. I think the main console and maybe part of the tape machine was augmented, but apart from that, it was the same stuff. So it was really quite a dream experience to be working there, but at the same time a little daunting, because every day I'd come in, I got to play the new song that we're about to get working on. It's usually early in the day, and I could hear, because the studio's right up against the kitchen, I'd start playing a song, but I couldn't get rid of the self-conscious feeling of like, oh my God, Ringo's in there.
Right.
This guy's used to coming into the studio in the morning and hearing somebody go, well, here's the song today. It goes like this. Hey Jude.
Right.
I'm thinking, and I'm singing songs like, you're a strange animal. You can't help but think, what is he thinking? Probably wasn't thinking a damn thing, but how much to do with that?
They look so radical. Hearing your words, they sound fanatical. Something inside reveals you're magical. Oh, how can I get enough? You're a strange animal. That's what I know. But you're a strange animal. I got to follow. Stick a line in your system, analyzing the defenses you hold, trying to open wide, hoping to step inside your soul. But everything here is unfamiliar. Nothing they've seen remotely similar. How can it be you're so peculiar? Oh, how can I get enough? You're a strange animal. That's what I know. But you're a strange animal. I got to follow. Whoa. To follow.
record progressed, there were a couple of, really memorable moments when he just would pop into the studio and make some really encouraging comments on the record as it began to really unfold. And there was one song in particular, the song that opens the album is called Cosmetics. And he used to come in more regularly when that song came on. He said, every time this one comes on, we start dancing around in the kitchen.
Oh, wow.
And
That's
I thought,
cool.
oh man, I wish I had video of that.
Right.
But that was the reason why we decided to open the album with that song Cosmetics. I figured if he ever listens to this album, I want him to hear his favorite song the moment he drops the needle. And he can take it off after that if he wants. But that was kind of the motivation for that.
Super cool. One of the things that about your career, huge in Canada, obviously, right? And I think the business at the time, for some reason, was reluctant to really release your records in the States, but I think you did a tour for Tears for Fears in the States, trying to make that happen. Can you reflect a bit on that time? Was that frustrating?
Sure. No, yes, it was frustrating. It was frustrating, but I was so taken with the fact that suddenly, like, I'd made an album before Strange Animal, and it didn't do well commercially, and I really had, like any artist, you have high hopes for that first record you put out, and as did the record company. But the way the music industry was then, and it's almost, it can be difficult for younger people who've grown up with the internet this whole time, the last 20 years, to really comprehend this. But the way the music industry, part of what made it work and why there were 4 major labels is they really controlled the market so effectively, and that's because they were good business people. That's how they did it. So there would be various artists who, regardless of how successful they were in one territory, were just deemed for whatever reason to be not essential to be released in another territory, So, and that territory for me and for most people that matters is the United States.
Yeah.
So for example, there used to be in record stores an import section, and you'd find bands there that were huge in other countries, like, for example, The Jam. There's one example of a band from England that could play, Wembley Stadium, but was in the import section of it whenever I'd go into a record store if I was in the States or something. This is really odd. But I began to realize this is part of how they could control the market. And so I fell into that category. In Canada, it didn't matter how many times my records would go platinum. Right. The Columbia, Canada was thrilled with me, and Columbia in the U.S., although it's the same company, we're like, no, we really have other artists that are filling that slot. You were so categorized,
right.
that they would look at it and say, no, we've got that slot filled already with that.
That's such
that's where it felt kind of unfair, because you get very categorized, etc., and that can hold you back.
That's such a weird thing, because just from a business perspective, if something is working, right, if something is earning, making money, then it's part of the nature of business to, well, let's try it over here too, right? So it's almost counterintuitive to the nature of business. It's weird.
That's how I was thinking at the time, Eric. But now that I'm a little older and I understand things a little bit further about marketing,
right.
If you think of it, it's like if you had a great, so let's take it out of the realm of music. If you had a great coffee that you were selling, and your Starbucks, right, and you've got this incredible French roast, and suddenly this other, and you're marketing it and selling really well in the United States, and suddenly this other French roast comes out, still under Starbucks, umbrella,
right.
but it's made in Quebec in Canada, in the French part of Canada, and you suddenly realize, this is really good too. If we put this French roast out with our other French roast, it's going to confuse our consumers.
Right, right.
And it's going to interfere with what we've got going, which is working very, very well. And So when I think of it in terms like that, I don't take it so personally. But
Right.
of course, at the time, I took it very personally, as
No
did
doubt.
my manager. My manager was a fellow named Ray Daniels, and he manages a very successful band called Rush.
Mm-hmm.
And he was extremely frustrated by it, and so that he was pivotal in me. He put me on that Tears for Fears tour in 1985 when they had songs from The Big Chair and Shout and Everybody Wants to Rule the World.
Mm-hmm.
Were like at number one, and he muscled me basically onto that tour, and we did exceedingly well with the audiences, and get lots of radio interviews and a couple of encores at some of the shows, and it was really successful. And even the local CBS reps back then in various cities would be, God, this must be such a frustration for you, because I'm not hearing anything from New York about us releasing your record.
Yeah.
So, we tried by whatever means we could back then to kind of force their hand, but it ultimately proved to be unforceable. And in the meantime, I was having a great time going back and forth across Canada and playing, big shows and enjoying myself, and eventually tried to stop thinking about it, but I couldn't. It's a frustration. I would go and play a show, for example, in Buffalo, where they get Canadian airplay, and their stations were actually playing my stuff and do really well there. So it was a frustration, and I knew it wasn't something wrong in the marketing. It's just the way in my own approach,
Right.
that it was tied up with the marketing music industry of the time, and it's a very boring story to even talk about. I'm putting myself to sleep with it.
I
won't bore your listeners any further.
I asked. I'm interested in that stuff, and I want to ask about so there's a few other solo records. There's a slight directional change in '93 with "You Can Call Me Larry," and I want to sort of marry that into you connecting with Styx, because I think it's interesting because on that record it was a bit more stripped down, solo acoustic-y kind of stuff, right? And before I get to my real question, have you ever suggested when there's time for love to do like during the Styx acoustic sets? Because damn, I can just imagine those dudes hitting harmonies on those choruses.
Yeah,
on that song.
Our managers even said that as well. It just hasn't come. We haven't come around to taking a crack at something like that yet. It just it's hard to crack the Styx lineup of songs. They have this great canon of material that over the course of a 2-hour show.
Yeah,
it's really difficult to kind of squeeze anything else in other than what they've done, or what a few of the pieces that we've done in the time that I've been in the band.
Yeah.
But thanks. Anyway, the change in direction in '93 was that the 1980s were very good to me. That's the other thing I should definitely qualify here, is that my videos particularly were played on television across Canada to a degree that was really almost oversaturation. And like a lot of things at the end of the 1980s, things looked suddenly very old. The 1980s, once the 90s started, and once you saw Nirvana and Pearl Jam, but particularly Kurt Cobain, that changed everything.
Yeah.
As far as how a band is supposed to look and supposed to sound, and how visceral the kind of rock they're coming out with, and it really drew a line between the 90s and the 80s. And in addition to that, though, what I really gravitated towards was when I saw Eric Clapton do Layla on acoustic guitar. It suddenly kind of reignited this. I'm back to the beginning of the story again, where I wanted to play at least acoustic guitar. I could hack on that to some degree and come up with something, and I was kind of trying to learn what Clapton was doing with Layla, and through that I realized a singer-songwriter approach is really what I'd like to try on a record, and it'll be a completely different direction from what I did in the 80s, and that's why that album, Lawrence Gowan, But You Can Call Me Larry. Up until then, I'd been a one-name guy, just Gowan.
Right.
But when that came out, that did really well, and a lot of people, even in Canada, didn't know who it was by for a while until it was doing well, and I'd even be asked on radio, so you are the same guy that had the mullet.
Right.
Timing's wrong. You're out there eager to fly. I'll say so long, but I'll sure be watching the sky. When your wheels finally touch the ground, look me up, I'll be around. When there's time for love, I wanna be there. When you've got all night for love, I see you and me there. Or maybe our time isn't now, but it will come around. Must be nice out there chasing the stars. Tried it once or twice, flew real high and I fell real hard. Do what you got to do, make every single dream come true. And when there's time for love, I wanna be there. When you've got all night for love, I see you and me there. Or maybe our time isn't now, but it will come around. Yes, it will come around. It'll come around. When you think your soaring days are done, you're gonna find out how they've just begun. Yeah. Oh, it'll come around. When your wheels finally touch the ground, look me up, I'll be around. 'Cause when there's time for love, I wanna be there. When you've got all night for love, I see you and me there. 'Cause when there's time for love, I wanna be there. When you've got all night for love, I see you and me there. Or maybe our time isn't now, but it will come around.
You weren't alone in that, because a lot of, like you kind of said, 70s, 80s bands kind of found themselves out in the cold at that point in time. And, that record was successful, but, maybe business-wise, you couldn't have, it was 99 when you connected with Styx, but, a lot of the bands of the 80s were probably a bit lost at that point, right? Not saying you were, but,
No,
the
well,
fact
this is
that...
it. It's funny. It's always at the turn of a decade. There's always a musical shift, a pivot,
right,
that happens, and often the bands, they have to grapple with how do we make ourselves relevant in this new decade when we typify so strongly what happened in the decade where they've made it. So you saw as the 70s, converted over to the 80s, moved into the 80s, you saw so many classic rock bands have to attempt anyway that transition into making video, because if you weren't making video if you weren't on television, you weren't on radio in the 80s,
Right.
So you weren't in people's heads. So you'd see great 70s bands, Queen, Genesis, Yes, then even we'll include Elton John in that. All those great bands from the 70s had to try to make that 80s transition, and some were successful, and many were not. And again, the same thing happened with the 80s. It's funny, when I listen to the 80s music now, I hear that the music was a lot stronger than I seem to have had it in my mind, because I think we were so saturated with television images of that music that sometimes it just got a little bit, you were oversaturated with it. That's the best way I can kind of describe it quickly.
Right.
And now when I hear those songs, wow, there's just as strong material that came out in that decade as any. And songs that I even ignored at the time, I love now,
Yeah,
So for me, for the 90s, it was trying to strip everything back to being a singer-songwriter and not a video a video star, so to speak.
Yeah, and the point where you converge with Styx, I find, serendipitous, right? Because they did the reunion tours with Dennis, and those were successful, and it kind of reestablished Styx as, an arena band. Not that they weren't, but here they are, they're back, right? And they did those 2 tours, and then once he leaves, they also get, Todd Zuckerman comes into the picture, gives like this serious jolt of like young, energetic, powerful drumming, right? And then here you are, right? So like in 99, with that convergence of that lineup, it was like Styx renewed, is the way I see it.
Well, I'm glad you see it that way. It's again, I would relegate it to that idea that when a decade changes, something usually has to shift in order for a band to continue on, and often those changes can be kind of painful, So I wasn't there when, for example, John Panazzo went through his health struggles toward the end, and eventually he died from them in 95. And Todd came into the picture. Todd was ready, and he was a fan of the band and knew their music intimately, as he as he dissects any musical piece that he goes after. And he was from Chicago, and he just fit right in and brought that young energy to the back line of the band. And then when I wound up playing with them in 1997, they built this new Montreal Forum, which was I actually headlined the old Montreal Forum, but by 1997 I was playing solo, just without a band that year. I was touring just solo on piano and playing some acoustic guitar. And the promoter that had me booked in Montreal on the same night, I was playing at a theater called the Theater St. Laurent. He called about 2 weeks before that show and said, "I'm going to honor those tickets. I want you to take your show to Montreal, the new Montreal Forum," which at that point was maybe 2 months old.
Right.
And I'd like to open the show for Styx. And I said, "Well, it's just me on piano, right?" And he said, "Yeah, that's what I want you to just do that." I said, "In a full arena." And he says, they know your songs.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, well, let's see if this could work in a full arena. And I think the curiosity of that was enough that I know that Styx manager Charlie Brusco, he came up to Montreal just to see what that would be like, to see how that, an opener that's a single guy on piano, and I guess he had other reasons to go there as well, but he saw that show and it went exceedingly well. And then for the first time ever after I played, I got to see Styx, and I'd never seen the band live. I knew all their albums, of course, but I'd never seen them live, and I thought their show was great. But the weird thing is, I made an odd comment just to a friend I was with at that show. I just turned to them and went, I'm liking this more than I thought I would. I was really digging their show, and I said, I've never made this comment ever. I said, it's weird. I feel like I would fit into this band.
Wow,
and that's
right.
just the oddest thing. I don't even know why it came out of my mouth. It's just an odd thing that I said. And it may have been predicated on the fact that when I came off after my set, that Tommy Shaw said to me, "Man, that was he was really effusive in his praise, and the rest of the guys were as well." And he said, we'll work together again in the future. And entirely at that time, his intention was, as was my understanding, that I would open shows for them.
Right.
There were a lot of good reasons for that, because when you have a single guy on stage to open your show, you don't have to change the whole setup.
Oh, yeah.
It's good for the crew.
Yep.
Good for the audience, a little sing-along thing that happens. And then 2 years later, I got a call, and they said we've split with we've had a split in the band, and we've decided that we're going to go on with a new piano player, a singer, and we'd be interested in seeing if you'd be into that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, seriously, a perfect fit. From day one as a Styx fan, I had no reservations about you in that spot. Just incredible. The one thing I do want to ask you, kind of maybe a bit of an odd question, but a different perspective, because you get, you I'm sure you've gotten the question a million times about, quote, filling shoes, right? Which is, we know the answer to that. You're just you,
Yeah.
and you're doing your thing, and that's that. But in your tenure of Styx, you've been there for what, 18 years, something like that now?
Yeah.
Yeah. The other guys just consistently, and I understand why, but they just always get asked about a reunion, right? So when you hear that stuff, do you is there any bit of you that's like, come on, man, I'm here, right? You know what I mean?
I think it's absolutely inevitable, understandable, and that people want the band that they grew up with,
right,
to have to be intact and to be together. Just like there's a familial aspect to it as well. Look, when I often say this, when I heard that Peter Gabriel was no longer going to be in Genesis, I thought, well, that's the end of Genesis.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. And then when I heard that the drummer, who up until then I didn't even know, I wasn't sure, I knew his name was Phil, but that he was going to sing, I thought, well, that's just crazy. That's not going to be this. That's not going to be the same. Well, it wasn't the same, but it turned out that it was great nonetheless.
Yeah. And
we got all those great Peter Gabriel solo records, because of that. And Genesis went on to do absolutely. Their work didn't take one back step to what they had done prior to that. And when I saw them live, particularly, that's what it really galvanized it in my brain, where it was like, bands can change, and things unfortunately in life can have to go through difficult periods of change, but they can ultimately lead to good things, depending on your perspective, of course.
Right.
I'd be just as entitled to feel that, nope, without Peter Gabriel up front, it's just not the band that I want to hear.
Right.
So I understand when some people feel that way. At the same time, I really look at it as this. Everyone who's ever been in this band is part of the reason that the band is so good.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of that. We are the culmination of the efforts of everyone who's ever been in the band. So obviously that would include John Panazzo, John Serluski, who was in there for 5 albums before Tommy Shaw joined the band, and apparently made some great contributions to a number of the songs that go a little bit unheralded because it's so far in the past. But JY and Chuck, they tell me all kinds of things that John Serluski contributed to why the band sounds the way it does. And then, of course, there's Dennis DeYoung. And then, of course, there's Glenn Burtnick during an album they did in 1991, I believe, Edge of the Century, where Tommy wasn't in the band again. Mm-hmm. But it really is. And then Glenn was in the band when I first joined for the first 5 years. So it's what's on that stage tonight and last night and all these times, and then this latest DVD that I should mention, Styx Live at the Orleans Arena in Las Vegas, and that's just come out. We are the culmination of all those efforts over all those years.
Yeah.
And when people talk about a reunion, it's really 11 people in total have been members of Styx.
Right.
So that's okay. You can basically come up with your favorite lineup, and that's it. I would also, though, add that where I really feel my own contribution to this great legacy is that in that there are new generations who've discovered classic rock.
Mm-hmm.
They over the last 18 years, particularly over the last 10 or 11, I've noticed the audience getting younger and younger every single year, to the point now where every night is that at least 50% of the audience is under 30 years of age, and were never even born when some of the biggest Styx records were made.
Right.
And for a good number of them, the first record they heard might have been Cyclorama. And
Right.
That could be their favorite. Quite often that ends up being their favorite record because it was the one that introduced the band to them, or that's the one that they first heard for whatever reason. And then they wound up going back and discovering, the depth of the band and what the classic era of progressive rock. And they become, adamant and devoted Styx fans, but they know this incarnation and this era of the band is what they relate to. So they find it, when I've had, casual conversations with them, they find it kind of like, well, this is the band I know, so any change to that would be a change to what I know.
Right, exactly, right.
And with people with the band who've known it from the beginning, they've either been able to make the transition or they can't. And all points of view are valid.
Yeah,
they really
of
are.
course.
And I just have to kind of bow to that. And if they ever wanted to make a change in the future, that's always up for debate. And once you're in a band, you have to keep earning your place in that band. That doesn't go away.
Right.
So this is not a band that you want to take your eye off the ball and relax to any great degree, because if you do, you'll be out.
Right. I want to.
it.
Right. I want to ask you about a song or two on Cyclorama, because I do love that record, and that's your
Thanks.
so far that's your only original studio record with Styx, right? There's More Love for the Money, which is one of your tunes, and there's a line in that song that just always just spot on. It's searching for true enlightenment for 10% cheaper. I just love that.
Man.
In terms of materialism, that's a perfect line.
I was really happy with that line. First of all, you're the first guy ever to quote that line in an interview, and I'm really happy about that. Thank you very much for doing that, Eric.
Love it.
I like that song, More Love for the Money. I think it in some ways, it's funny. We played Pieces of Eight last night, and I think it ties in a kind of a tertiary way to the sentiment in that song, which I think is tremendously relevant today as it was back when they first released it on the Pieces of Eight album. But More Love for the Money is a circus flea from A to B, I jump for my keeper in search of true enlightenment for 10% cheaper.
That's such a great line. I just love that line.
I remember that when I sang that one to JY, that put a big smile on his face. And he went, I like that line. So
that's cool.
That's good.
That's cool.
You might be the only other person quoted it in an interview, so thank you.
The cats were on the table, they were waiting for their dinner, till the children came and shooed them all away. Daddy's at the racetrack, desperate just to pick one winner. Will he ever be their hero of the day? Mom paid the price, she sacrificed for nothing of value. And why is it I buy the shit that nobody wants to? More love for the money, that's all I'm after. More buzz for the honey, and a bit more laughter. Why is that so much to ask? awkward and uncertain. God, it's got to be here somewhere, I believe. My demographic profile knows it's showtime. Raise the curtain, start the comedy, and let me be naive. A circus flea from A to B, I jump for my keeper, in search of true enlightenment for 10% cheaper. More love for the money, that's all I'm after. More buzz for the honey, and a bit more laughter. Why is that so much to ask? More for the money, but price it better come down fast. There's a place beyond these shadows of this dreary road I tread. Then for me, that's all that matters. Just the promise of arriving, maybe getting there before I'm dead.
Love One With Everything on that record, for so many reasons. That, and your part in that, the opening riff or motif is on guitar, and then in the break, like you're really you're progging up that riff on the keyboard, and it sounds awesome. That's great stuff in that song.
Thank you. That I can hear all my influences in that one section of there. That 7/8 section is that's Keith Emerson and Rick Wakeman and Tony Banks, and I'm trying to kind of venerating the shrine that they put together in that prog era, and it's funny because that section of the piece, we were playing that. It was mainly actually Todd Glenn at the time and myself. We would play that section just as an instrumental during a lot of our sound checks. And by the way, that's something I should say. We play new stuff all the time, particularly in the sound checks. We just don't put records out at the pace that once was expected. That doesn't mean that we don't do new things. There's just it's just we never have this feeling of it. Well, it's imminent that this must come out now. But back then, 2003, when we did that, Tommy came in with that opening riff of the down, 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 and he thought, oh, that instrumental piece you guys were playing, I'm going to take that the second half of that, and that became part of the verse. But then as the song was coming together, I think for a while there we were calling it Pompeii, and because it was getting bigger and bigger, it was just becoming a bigger, more kind of unwieldy thing. And then suddenly I thought, well, maybe that whole instrumental section would fit into this. We suddenly changed from 4/4 time into 7/8 there, and so I said, okay, let's give that a shot. And I had to sing that part in my head for a moment. And then it got bigger and bigger to where it was like, okay, this is what it must feel like to put together a great kind of progressive rock song where everyone got a section in there. You know, there's a JY section, there's a Todd section, there's my own, you know, musical contribution. Glenn contributed some great chord changes in one part, and then Tommy had the vision for it. And then at the end of us saying, you know, this song doesn't really sound like it's about Pompeii.
Right.
I made the joke. I happened to just make an offhand joke. I said, no, this reminds me of the old joke about what the Buddhist said to the hot dog vendor.
Which is?
What's that? I said, make me one with everything. So I remember JY kind of laughed at that, and he went, that's one with everything. And Tommy went off and basically got the whole trajectory of the arc of the lyrics together and built it around that. And that really was, that's why I'm so pleased with that. It was a real group effort from beginning to end that resulted in a song that no one of us could have written on our own, but with the combined brain, it came together, and it made me think this is probably how some of those great prog rock pieces like Close to the Edge or you know, Carnival 9, this is likely how they must have come together, because they just have so many angles of personality that keep you know, suddenly bubbling up, and that's why it makes that music so interesting.
Through The world we see is a mystery, but we hold the key if we have the faith to live and believe.
I did an interview recently with Ricky Phillips, and we talked about that song, and one of the things that he clued me in on, like you said, you're always kind of coming up with pieces, and you guys are writing on the road and stuff. He said you were in the sort of early stages. He didn't have a lot of details. This was a couple months ago that you guys are compiling a record, right? And he said you're sort of taking a meticulous approach to what that quote classic Styx sounds might mean in terms of like instrumentation and sounds and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that? I assume he's telling the truth.
Yeah, well, sure. We're always, like I said, the funny thing is this: we're always working on new stuff. It's like that's never stopped.
Right.
Just with the touring schedule we have, we just don't feel it incumbent on us to necessarily just throw stuff out there if we don't have a plan together to properly promote it. So I would blanket statement the whole thing by saying nothing imminent.
Right. Gotcha.
Okay. I mean, there is. I can verify that there is stuff, and we do have fun. As Ricky said, we have had fun kind of sculpting out. Hey, let's. I'm just goofing around with something at home where I'm just using only my vintage keyboards. I'm only using my Oberheim and my B3 and stuff. And Ricky's like, yeah, I'll add something to that. And he's using only his vintage gear.
Right.
And then I happen to have a 24-track machine in Toronto, so I'm recording some stuff to tape. And we're digging it. But we're, like I said, this is an ongoing.
Right.
These projects have gone for a long time. We could at any time throw together a bunch of material and say, okay, here's a new album. But we're reluctant to do that because we're just in such a different era now. So at some point, it's going to, and it could be sooner than later. I don't know. We could suddenly say, I think we have all the bits we need here for an album. But
right.
until that moment, I wouldn't want to kind of tease people with the idea that anything new is imminent.
Gotcha. On the day we record this, by the way, there's a new Kansas album out and a new Marillion album out. So,
wow,
it's
man, oh man, they're making us look bad.
Right. As far as recording goes, I heard in another interview that you're kind of slowly but surely plugging away on a new solo album. What can you say about that?
for several years, and a lot of that ties with what's going on with Styx. It started with me and Jerry Marotta and Tony Levin, who worked on my older stuff, going into a studio in Woodstock and working up some stuff there with a guy I've been partnered up with, a producer in Toronto, and that is actually very close to completion, but still needs some tweaking that's going to actually put the cherry on top. And until that's done, it's
right.
closer to being ready, but it's not actually ready.
Right. Gotcha.
And in addition to that, I have to say, I really am reluctant to put something out if I'm not able to devote at least half a year to promoting just that. When you throw songs out on the internet and you don't have any kind of live plans that tie to it, I think you're really putting it out. It's like dropping a bottle in the ocean now with the amount of music that's available over the internet. So I think I'm now going back to the beginning of our conversation. Now I'm the one who's trying to be a little bit more careful with the marketing part of it,
right.
Because you have to you market yourself now. You don't really rely on the big labels to do it anymore. You really have to look after that yourself. And my instinct says that to just throw something out there and not have the time and the focus on properly promoting it is to kind of it's a little bit like kind of deciding to homeschool your kid, except you just tell him to go out in the world and see what he can pick up.
Right.
It just doesn't seem like it's. I don't think I'm being a good custodian of the piece to just do that. So that will come out as well, and I'm excited about it. I'd love to go on and on about it. I'd like to play you the whole thing right now where it sits. But
right.
But I'm going to kind of delay that enthusiasm and just say it's something that I'm hoping that I'm on the planet long enough to get to. In the meantime, I'm looking at a Styx schedule where there's another 100 shows in front of my face, and I'm thinking, wouldn't it just be great if there's just more days in the year?
Right, exactly. Because, I would imagine. And if and when that record does come out, and you say if you have the luxury to promote it, a couple months here and there, could that? This might be a premature question, but could that possibly include a solo U.S. club tour?
Oh man, I would love that.
Yeah.
I would love that, and maybe that's possible. I actually last year I played a completely solo show, just myself in Baltimore, and it was a one-off. It was last December, but that went really well, and I was pleasantly surprised to see how many Styx fans over the years have gravitated toward or are aware of my solo work now and my life before Styx. And many of them, a surprising number, come to the solo shows that I've been doing in Canada since 2010. They usually end up eating up the 2 or 3 of the first rows. And I love that. I love the fact that they see this connection now between my life before the band and my life in the band. And I guess that the bridge song there is A Criminal Mind, because from the very first day I walked in the room, the very first song we ever played together or jammed on was A Criminal Mind before we even played a Styx song. So I do feel that there's a connection there between at this point, and a lot of that comes through the audience, just having done their due diligence on the background check.
Well, you've had a long tenure in Styx, so people in the States, you don't need Tears for Fears anymore. We know you, right? So.
Well, what's really great is the fact that you even brought up Strange Animal, in this interview. That surprises me still when someone in America will bring it up, and but I'm very happy about that, Or so often I'll meet Yes fans that bring up Moonlight Desires, for example, because John Anderson does such a great vocal break in that song, and but I'm always really happy when people have discovered it on their own.
Nice. All right, I want to ask you just kind of one silly question. Ooh.
Hit me.
I want to ask you a silly question, kind of in closing. In a boxing match, who wins, Great White Hope or Keep Up the Fight?
This is a Styx interview, right? So, since this is a Styx interview,
That's a Lawrence Gowan interview.
It's absolutely Great White Hope. Now, if this is gonna suddenly be used also as a Gowan interview, then it's hands down it's Keep Up the Fight. Actually, you know what? So to take it slightly more seriously, I love boxing video metaphors that have been used over the years. I think Rocky won that one overall.
Right, of course. Raging Bull.
Yeah, the Eye of the Tiger thing. What did they use in Raging Bull again? What did they use? Was it a Stones piece?
I don't remember.
What did they use? I can't. It's funny because I know the movie so well, and I can't. For some reason, I'm thinking they must have used Street Fighting Man or something like that.
Maybe.
Anyway.
So it depends. Great White Hope, Keep Up the Fight. Depends on who's listening.
It totally depends on that. But in a cage match, I wouldn't want to really put myself up against JY in just about anything like that. You know, he's just bigger than me.
Right.
You know, in some instances, size does matter.
And he was Dr. Righteous, and he was mean, right? He was
Dr. Righteous. Man, oh man.
Yeah.
It's only righteous that he wins this one. I love playing Great White Hope, by the way. I really, because I got to do the announcer voice at the beginning of it.
Right. That's cool.
Yeah, when we did that on the DVD of us doing Grand Illusion and Pieces of Eight, the full albums back to back, I do the ladies and gentlemen.
From the city of big shoulders, right? Isn't that what it is?
Yes. From the city of the big shoulders. In this corner, from the city of the big shoulders. The number one contender. Yeah.
It's great. All right, sir. Well, I want to thank you so much thanks for the interview. Thanks for taking the time to chat, and thank you for the great music through the years. I love that 2000 era lineup. To me, Styx, that was a high watermark, and in no small part to you, good sir. So, thank you for that.
Oh, I really appreciate that, and yeah, there was a lot of angst in the band at that point to see if they could make that transition into the new millennium, and it really did kind of work out to this point. We've been very, very fortunate, very lucky, and I look forward to you coming and seeing the next time we're in your area, Eric. You got to come and see a show.
Right on. Cool. Look forward to it. People can find you online is StyxWorld.com.
StyxWorld.com is where they find all their Styx information. There's a Styx Facebook page. There's lots of Styx sites they can go to that they'll find with an easy search.
Right.
Or if they want to look up my solo stuff, they can look on just Gowan. There's Gowan. There's a site called Gowan Bomb Plates. That's .com. That's a new website that's come together. There's a Gowan.org.
Okay.
There's a Gowan Facebook page, so they can find it. I'm sure they will.
Right on. Cool.
Nice talking to you, Eric. This was a good conversation, man. There's lots of interesting stuff that you brought up, and I'm glad we finally we connected.
Likewise, thank you, sir. You'll have to tell JY that the Great White Hope, Keep Up the Fight question. See how he answers it.
I'm going to. Again, another very unique one. So that's good. So
all right, man.
So the next time I see you, Eric, keep up the fight. Okay.
All right, sir. Thank you so much.
Talk to you later. Cheers.
Bye.
I stand accused before you. I have no tears to cry, and you will never break me till the day I die. A criminal mind is all I if I'm really so bad. I am. I spent my life behind these steel bars. I paid my debt in time, but being brought to justice, that was my only crime. A criminal mind is all I ever had. Ask one who's known me if I'm really so bad. I am. Before you hand me over, before you read my sentence, I'd like to say a few words here in my own defense. Some people struggle daily. They struggle with their conscience till the end. I have no guilt to haunt me. I feel no wrong intent. No! A criminal mind is all I ever know. Don't try to reform me, 'cause I'm made of cold stone. My criminal mind is all I ever had. Ask one who's known me if I'm really so bad. I am.
Thanks again for listening to this conversation with Lawrence Gowan. As mentioned, you can find more of him on gowan.org or also on styxworld.com. and both of which are also on Facebook. You can find more Pods and Sods on our website, podsodcast.com. The aforementioned interview with Ricky Phillips is up there, and probably some more Styx guys coming down the road. So hopefully you'll go check that out. You can also find us on Facebook, facebook.com/podssods. You can find us on iTunes, on Stitcher, on pretty much if you Google Pods and Sods, you'll find us. And if you do, hopefully you will leave a positive comment or rating or review, click some thumbs, click some stars. All that is always appreciated. So, so thanks again, Lauren. Thanks again, Lauren. Thanks again, Lawrence. Thanks again, you, for listening. And I will close with some words of wisdom that I always close with from Mr. Bill Hicks. Thank you.
The world is like a ride at an amusement park, and when you choose to go on it, you think it's real, because that's how powerful our minds are. And the ride goes up and down and round and round. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored, and it's very loud, and it's fun for a while. Some people have been on the ride for a long time, and they begin to question, is this real, or is this just a ride? And other people have remembered, and they come back to us, and they say, hey, don't worry, don't be afraid, ever, because this is just a ride, and we kill those people. Shut him up. We have a lot invested in this ride. Shut him up. Look at my furrows of worry. Look at my big bank account and my family. Has to be real. It's just a ride. But we always kill those good guys who try and tell us that. You ever notice that? And let the demons run amok? But it doesn't matter, because it's just a ride. And we can change it anytime we want. It's only a choice. No effort, no work, no job, no savings of money. A choice right now between fear and love. The eyes of fear want you to put bigger locks on your door, buy guns, close yourself off. The eyes of love instead see all of us as one. Here's what we can do to change the world right now to a better ride. Take all that money we spend on weapons and defense each year and instead spend it feeding, clothing, and educating the poor of the world, which it would many times over, not one human being excluded, and we can explore space together, both inner and outer, forever in peace.